We have another plan. We have another round. Now what we call the roundtable discussion. And the idea is, after we had now the inputs to the formal presentation of our report from the meeting of Athens last year, let me get my notes right here. The inputs and some reactions from members of parliament and DGs. We will now hear from people who are not from these stakeholders, outside stakeholders, and scientists and other members of ENSSER. But it is my pleasure to start out with passing on the mic firstly to opening the inputs. There's a number of people who will make short inputs, 2 minutes maximum, we said, if possible at all. And then we open up to everybody who hasn't had or wishes urgently to say something. Right now, it's my pleasure to call firstly on Professor Serafos. He is a member of the Athens Academy of Sciences and the president of the Mariopoulos Kanaginis Foundation, and has been a generous funder of our conference, his organization, the foundation, not he himself, but the foundation, of course, of our meeting and conference in Athens last year, and also, of course, as part of that effort of our gathering here. So it's our gratitude. I'd like to express our gratitude to you and the foundation for making this meeting possible here. And you will start out, and then afterwards there is 4 or 5 other people who I will pass on the word.
Thank you. I don't know if I can speak in 2 minutes.
Okay.
It will be a lot. So, but anyhow, I'm pleased to be here, and I thank my colleague Neni for inviting me, and also the chairperson and the invitee from the Parliament and the Green Party. As we all know, we are living in the worst, or one of the worst periods on Earth, of life and humanity on Earth. After the Black Death, I consider the 21st century one of the most dangerous centuries for simple reasons. You try to bring in touch science and policy. They don't match, I'm sorry. Pure science, it's pure science. And pure policy, it's completely outside of science. When they come together, they can produce something wonderful or something terrible. We are just at that crossroad in humanity and in playing with the future of our grandchildren. And the reason of the danger is that we have a third factor, which is called war. And war does not play games. So science and policy should revisit the relationship. And I liked your last statement on the absolute, as you said, the view needed when science is based on strictly reviewed evidence, if I got it properly. And also, previous speakers have discussed the issue of precautionary principle. If you put precautionary principle, which was introduced by Hippocrates, as you know, to prevent actually someone from dying by a disease. So now we know a few things about the disease of humanity, which is actually the way we deal with the earth. The earth is supporting us, so we need to support her. And this bilateral system has not yet been properly established. And we, unfortunately, I will now stop. I know I passed the 2 minutes, I'm sorry. But actually, the third agent, to remember an old movie, black and white, which is the war, is approaching, and it's in our backyard. So how we can make any decisions from the political point of view to support that precautionary principle, which is really demanding not to do anything harming humanity and the earth. I don't know what is the solution. Who is going to put the limit between war games and the real world? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Serafos, for these wise words and warning words, the dire times we're living in and what's looming. We thought in the past it's already bad, but it's getting worse. And science has a role in all of this to play, and science also got us into the mess. So for me, it's always an interesting aspect that is usually not really addressed well is which science, and maybe we can engage a little bit in the discussions on that. It was science, or a lot of it is science-based, that got us into the mess. The agriculture that we're doing today is called scientific agriculture. It's all based on science, and yet it is destroying our environment, and it keeps destroying our environment. And also the destruction of the climate through all the emissions that also stem in part from agriculture, from the way we produce our food, or from the way we carry out our businesses and we use the land. Much of it has been based on scientific knowledge. They claim also to be science-based. And then we are here, and you pointed it out, you hear something completely else. You go in another commission, and then it's all in another meeting, and then they complain it's too little science of that side, and then the others say it's too little science of this side. So it is this dimension that we're operating in. Understanding that it is the way it is, and that science got us into the place we are today, and that we need to get out and not toss the baby out with the bath water and throw science away, but we must change. And what I've heard a little bit is from the commission corner is like, we're doing it all already, and we're doing it fine, and we don't really have a big problem. So that's a bit the debate I'd like to see stimulated. How come that we have so diverging views, and we all say we are the best scientists and we're basing it on our best science? So maybe some of these aspects will be put on. You will get a go at it. I know you're burning already, but I would like to give, you might actually have the last moment of saying voicing your voice. I'd like to give now the mic to Jim Dratwa. I hope I pronounce it properly. Jim we have met just now for this meeting, and we've had already wonderful conversations. He is a philosopher and SCS scholar, and his research addresses the interconnections between knowledge, values, and public policy. And he's heading the team tasked with Science for Policy, which sounds perfectly suitable for what we're trying to do here. And he's the lead in the European Commission for the upcoming Commission recommendation on scientific evidence and public policy making. So I am curious to see and hear what he has to say. So
Great.
the mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Angelica, to you and to the entire network of colleagues for making this happen and for bringing me in. Now, science and policy, the stakes are high, and the starting question is this. What world do we want to live in together? Did I say we? I did. Okay. It can happen. It can happen. And it happened to me just now. And it's fine as long as whenever it happens, we just take a moment to think, who's in that we? And who's not? And how is that determined? And really, where are the others? Where are those who were not in that we? That is another crucial ethical question, a question at the heart of the interplay between the making of science and the making of public policy. What world? Who is in the we? Where are the others? And very much in that spirit, I want to thank you for the excellent report, the excellent recommendations. They are music to my ears, and as were the three excellent presentations we heard beforehand. And they are particularly timely because indeed I'm now tasked with this interesting new challenge of a cross-cutting nature at the heart of the Commission's renewed push for democracy, bringing together ethics advice, science advice, technology assessment, and foresight, all of this under the heading of Science for Policy, and counterpointed with the searching question of citizen participation in order to provide better suited guidance for policymaking across silos, sectors, disciplines. And indeed, you're right, it is heartening that as part of the Commission's flagship European Democracy Shield, there is this commitment to develop and deliver a Commission recommendation on scientific evidence and public policy making. So maybe just a few words on this because we don't have so much time, but I just want to say that it is really about cross-functional policy coordination, so those different streams of strategic intelligence, with the question, how do we make sure that the citizens are part of this picture and not sort of, as always, the beautifully recounted story that Eric, you were sharing with us, the citizens are always somewhere else on some other slide or in some other box. And then how can we also have vertical policy coordination? So across levels of governance, European, further international, national, also the local and regional level, very important, and horizontal policy coordination across sectors and disciplines. But because we're among very largely like-minded colleagues, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that we really do have a problem. Things are not fine. And it's just not, it's not only about misconceptions and misrepresentations of science for policy, though that is very important. It's not just about capture by vested interests, although again, super important to recognize this. What we see, and Michael, who's had to leave us, was making this point really well, is that at the moment, what we see is rather, in fact, forms of abandonment of scientific advice, evidence, expertise. So many of us have spent years, decades perhaps, deconstructing, criticizing, reframing, unpacking. And now we see that maybe we've done our job too well, or maybe is more likely the case, there are other factors in play. But this trick of saying, oh, you scientists, I'm going to be so happy to instrumentalize you and you'll be my shield. You'll be my weapon. Very little interest. And we are in a sort of pincer move between, on the one hand, the rise of certain forms of artificial intelligence. I use this term in inverted commas, not artificial, not intelligence, all that, but you know what I mean. And on the other hand, the splintering of our common world, of our shared reality. So, we can talk about a reproducibility crisis, and that's part of the issue, but there's also a reality crisis in the sense of precisely a fragmentation of our shared world. This is really something to take into account. And another one that's really rough, but we need to confront is that we've witnessed a move away from the environmental priorities and the social priorities, such as those that were set out even just 5 or 7 years ago. So it's also something that we have to confront. It's not just the science or the science for policy. Like there's really something there that's crucial. And then a last one to consider is that war maybe changes everything. How does our thinking, built for decades on at least the illusion of peace, change in the face of war? What world do we want to live in together? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very thoughtful words. I have on my list also Dominique Dassenville. Would you not for the moment? Okay, maybe later. Good. Just to make sure that I'm not overlooking people we have on the list. I would like to go to pass on the mic now to Professor Andras Sekash. I hope we know each other since decades, but I probably will never learn how to properly pronounce his name. And he is a professor now. I don't have it in front of me, I must say, of environment in Hungary. And what I know of him, he's also with the Hungarian Society of Ecotoxicology, is that we both have studied certain nasty compounds that are being applied in the environment in massive amounts on humans, on animals, on other living creatures in the environment. And in that capacity, you have been appointed by the Hungarian government to serve on the board of management board of EFSA for 2 terms, if I remember correctly, 8 years, and have had a lot of insight into how this machine is working here. And I would like to hear from you some reflections on what we have been discussing and presenting here and what you've been hearing. Yes, so Andras, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I also am worried whether I can keep the very strict time limit, but I do my best. Mr. Wiesik encouraged that we mention exact examples, concrete examples of decisions of where scientific input would have been or was welcome. And so I would like to mention 2 concrete examples. One is the recent legislation or recent steps, last steps in the legislation of the simplified eased regulation or approval process for certain organ plants actually modified by genome editing. This would be the first example, and then I would mention another example. Well, as we all know, now both the European Commission and the European Parliament in a trialogue with the Council and the Parliament in a trialogue with the Commission have passed that notion that these plants modified in their genome by genome editing, by NGT, new genomic technologies, certain examples of those would be subject to very light safety regulation in terms of approval for as registered product. And well, this has been a decision, and this is a decision where I see a very misfortunate abandonment of the precautionary principle. And right here, I would need to reflect to Dr. Berend that maybe you don't see that the Commission is abandoning the precautionary principle, but please accept that there are some who view it that way. In spite of the fact that you say you are not, we can make statements, but you are. No, I'm not, but you are. I mean, that wouldn't be really prospective. We do, and I do see it as an abandonment. And it worries me not only because our organization, ENSSER, the European Network of Scientists for Social and Environmental Responsibility, have announced several scientific statements about GMOs back then, and now several ones about NGT, about genome-edited organisms. And not only us, but other scientific organizations and scientists published results, alarming results in the open public scientific literature. Still, that is the response, that all these warnings are ignored or at least not taken into consideration. But that is one part of it. And the other part is that the way I see it, and it's not difficult to see, that it's not limited to NGT crops. Other regulated products are to follow. The omnibus proposal by the Commission for Food and Feed Safety envisions the lightened environmental risk assessment for a broad range of regulated products, and that in the light of our experience or as we see the environmental consequences, is not precautious. It is actually claiming that innovativeness is important, it makes good for the economy, so precaution should be less exercised. And even the argumentation for the omnibus proposal is the economy. The reasoning is economical growth, not the environmental issues. So I would just very briefly mention two examples, which I consider the two most alarming ones in the omnibus proposal. The case of the chemical and biological pesticides, and the case of the NGT modified microorganisms as for their environmental release goes. If we look at the history of pesticides, what we can see from that history is that they eventually will cause unintended, unforeseen side effects in the complex environment, in the complex network of the ecosystem. It's not a question if there will be side effects, it's just a question of the severity and the persistence of those side effects. So that is what is the abandonment of the precautionary principle in that case. One among the many proposals in that package offers or proposes unlimited approval, unlimited time approval for pesticide active ingredients. Nowadays, to come up with criticism about an existing registered pesticides, even in the case of periodical obligatory renewal of the permit, it is difficult, it's problematic to have any active ingredient restricted or in the use, not banned, but just restricted in that use. So how will it happen if the registration is not periodical? And then the other is just at the level of mentioning that the release of microorganisms, NGT microorganisms into the environment using a simplified environmental risk assessment is something that is unacceptable because of the uncertainties in the complex interactions in the ecosystem, and because of the very fast life cycle of these microorganisms and their variability. So that is also abandonment on the precautionary principle. Just a last comment also on that is that it's very alarming that propositions, principles, and unfulfilled promises heard as related to GMOs, of the development of GMOs that have been turned out unfulfilled promises, for example, now come up unchanged, almost unchanged format, very slightly modified in their forms, and it's still can be a reasoning for these eased registration process or procedures. So that is why we urge, and very strongly or loudly urge, to return to the precautionary principle in the approvals. Thank you.
This was seriously over 2 minutes. So I hope the others think a little more to it. Otherwise, we will run out of time, and I'd like to hear a few others as well. So the next speaker who wants to comment on it is Glenn Milo from Sciences Citoyennes, another member organization also of ENSSER, I must say, so a close colleague and friend of ours. Yes, Sciences Citoyennes.
So I'd like to get back to one of the recommendations introduced by Dr. Pertner, our third speaker, but also in connections with the reactions from both MEPs and from the representatives of the European Commission. The European Youth Citizens Assembly on Pollinators have just concluded this month, and its report is due quite soon for publication. And when available, I invite you to have a look at their recommendations. Because first, it was the European Parliament that asked for this Citizens Assembly, because also DG Environment, DG Santé, and DG Agri took part in the steering board. And also, and above all, because they are very good. I had the opportunity to chair the advisory committee of this assembly, and once again, I can confirm that citizens, when provided with enough knowledge, and when I say enough knowledge, I'm also referring to dissenting voices, which was mentioned previously. So when they have enough knowledge and enough time for deliberation, they consistently produce thoughtful recommendations, even on very complex issues. It was on pollinators, which is a very complex issue. But to elaborate the best possible recommendations, members of such assemblies need to see the big picture, which means also need to learn about the ongoing controversies, not having only one voice. And they really ask for it. They really want to know beyond what is proposed generally by the training sessions. And because they have no personal interest, that helps them to focus on public interest. And really they do. European Commission has been experiencing such assemblies at the EU level for several years now. The Joint Research Center, with the help of the Competence Center on Participatory and Deliberative Democracy, but also other DGs are developing their expertise in such procedures. Furthermore, many MEPs have also expressed the wish to have more of this kind of assemblies to help them design and take the right decisions. But given research and innovation's crucial role in addressing our main societal needs, for instance, finding alternatives to pesticides is one of the recommendations from this assembly. Why aren't citizens involved in designing the next framework program? Just to let you know, you probably already know that, but a budget of more than 175 billion has been proposed by the European Commission for the 10th framework program, which is almost double the budget of FP9. But it has also been announced that it will be closely linked with the European Competitiveness Fund, which is probably good news for industrial stakeholders, but probably not that good for environment and health. So why couldn't citizens have the say when such an important shift is about to happen?
Angeliki Lissimahu, you have the floor. You're the head of science and policy of Pesticide Action Network Europe, situated here in Brussels, and probably most of you know you anyway. So I'm looking forward to hearing what your reflections are.
It's also my honor to be a member of
Definitely of the board of ENSSER. Exactly. Sorry.
No, but yes, this meeting could not be more timely. and relevant because we need to highlight once again that the politics right now, as we also heard from the members of the parliament, do not follow science. And here maybe we, as you rightly said, we have to put an asterisk and say science for the protection of human health and the environment. So I will disagree that the politics are not influenced by private interests. And I have this, I know this from a personal experience because I work on the pesticide regulation. So for those that do not know, this is a piece of legislation that we have in Europe that is very good. It aims at a high level of protection for human health and the environment, vulnerable groups, ecosystems, groundwater, water resources, and so on. And it is underpinned by the precautionary principle. However, it's not implemented very well in practice, and we have many dangerous pesticides right now in the market, despite knowing the adverse effects and toxicity. So I arrived in Brussels in 2014 because there was a problem. My background is I was doing research on endocrine disruptors and their impact to the environment. And I came to work in Brussels because there was a big lobby at the moment to preventing Europe to develop criteria to identify pesticides that are endocrine disruptors and take them away from the market. So at that moment, even though the DG Environment had done the work, there was a letter by scientists sent to the Commission that really blocked the process. And it was from scientists that some of them had conflict of interest. They were working from big firms like some food companies, or also pesticide companies, and completely blocked the process. So instead of having the criteria 2013, we got them in 2018. And the regulation was entered into force in 2011, let's say. But the very first pesticide that we saw that was banned as endocrine disruptor was in 2023. So this, and since then we only have 10 pesticides that have been banned. So there is a lot of problems with the implementation of the pesticide regulation, and we see that when it comes to scientific discussions, we have to fight every time. Even when the studies of the pesticide industry show that there is a toxic effect, we have to fight to show that whether this toxic effect is human relevant, whether there is a safe dose, even if it's a carcinogen, a genotoxic compound, or endocrine disruptor. And then again, instead of seeing the Commission insisting on the better implementation of the pesticide law, we see an attempt to deregulate. So instead of a European Green Deal and reduction of pesticides, we see now, we talk about competitiveness and reducing the cost for the industry and simplification. So that's why I come back to say that this is extremely relevant to discuss right now, to have this conversation and ensure that we don't deregulate the current protection of human health and the environment that we see in the European law, and we don't end up with a piece of regulation that would take decades afterwards to correct and bring it back to the protection of our health and our future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we have actually a policy advisor or a consultant to politicians and policymakers amongst us in ENSSER, Dr. Andrea Best, an agricultural scientist, working a lot in this house and probably familiar to many people here. You are sitting right at that interface of science and policy making here in Brussels. What are your reflections?
Yeah, maybe I'm sitting here to give maybe a bit another example. But first I wanted to state that everything my colleagues from ENSSER had stated here, I have made the same experiences here since I am here as free consultant in agro policy and environmental policy for years. And I don't want to put these experiences in question. That's first to state. But I even have to make another example. I had another experience in my life because my first expertise in my life and my deepest expertise is soil. And so I maybe want to rescue a little bit the Commission here in doing very well, I have to say, and I have to underline. Some of us maybe will remember in the year 2002 and around that year that the Commission has came out with the proposal for a soil regulation. And I have to say that this proposal has been very progressive, very responsible, and you had the imagination that this was underlined of a really serious precautionary principle. It has been, at that time, has been a proposal which was progressive in the meaning that it foresaw many of our challenges that we had then and that we have now, that has been 24 years ago, with climate change and with soil sealing and with food security. They saw that. And this proposal has been worked out from the famous, I would say famous, Joint Research Institute in ISPRA. So just a science department, more or less, of the European Commission, and was very, very progressive. And in this case, even the European Parliament supported that proposal. And in this case, it has been, if I remember it right, 5 or 6 member states who brought it down with the very they invoked the principle of subsidiarity, but at least it has been the agro industry and I would say the farmers lobby, which does not stay for farmers, but for another lobby who brought that down. And so it started as a tiger and landed as a carpet. But I'm happy that the Commission has had the mute that bringing out at least the soil mission from some years ago, and had tried to bring some order at least in the soil measurements of the member states, if not in soil conservation now. But this is my experience, and I think it belongs to the whole picture, and therefore I'm speaking about that today. Thank you.
Absolutely. So it is a bit of a note of hope, huh? It could work. It could work. Something could happen if we wanted to. Almost last, I'd like to ask Hans van Scharen, Corporate Observatory Europe, to offer us your reflections from your perspective as a civil society following big corporations in Europe and their lobby impact.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot to the work of ENSSER, which as a citizen in Europe, I can say it is extremely valuable to me and also for our work. It's always a joy to be one of the last speakers after having heard so many eloquent speakers and contributions. On plus of that, I'm having a horrible cold, so sorry for that. And also, if I may repeat some of the messages that you have already heard. Also, when I'm maybe in the few minutes I have become angry or emotional, that is not directed to the people from the European Commission. My anger of what's happening currently is directed to maybe the 13th floor of the Berlaymont building, where the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, presides and reigns, and maybe also to the European People Party, which is using the new majority in this House as an excuse for basically destroying or dismantling legislation that was made democratically the past decades. I'm also here because I want to promote a bit of work of 2 of my colleagues, Vicky Kahn and Nina Holland, who published very recently the Pollution Playbook together with the Center for International Environmental Law. And I will detail a bit. I brought copies, so please take some home with you so that I don't have to carry it with me. I wanted to start with saying that 25 years ago, when CEO, my organization started, we studied lobbying and how corporate interest influences European policymaking. Now, today, we should no longer talk about lobbying. We should talk about corporate capture. Corporate capture is the new normal. And I want to quote an article that was published just a few weeks ago in an investigative German platform, Correctiv. It was about the chemical sector and how the chemical sector is basically dominating the course of the European Union right now. And the quote was from an anonymous chemical plant manager and linked also to CEFIC, the main chemical lobby here in Brussels. And the quote is, I quote, "Access is direct and not complicated. I don't call it lobbying anymore. It goes as follows. The industry tells politicians what to do." And indeed, we have been, as CEO, we have been documenting the current deregulation wave since 2024, when it was still called simplification. It is language, we have all spelled it out. You can all find it on our website. Free of use, reality checks, implementations, dialogues, cutting red tape, promoting competitiveness. And all this started, what very little people know, way before the 24 elections in Antwerp, at the headquarters of BASF, where CEFIC, as I said, the biggest lobby platform of the chemical sector, 100 lobbyists, lobby budget of around 10 million a year, convened a meeting where Ursula von der Leyen came, the Belgian Prime Minister at the time, Alexander De Croo came, and many others. And that was followed by the Antwerp Declaration. And the Antwerp Declaration is basically more or less of a blueprint of the political guidelines of Ursula von der Leyen. Then I will very briefly, if I can still outline this pollution playbook. And a lot of the things were already mentioned. But so the toxical pollution crisis that we are seeing or not seeing, that's maybe the problem, we're not seeing it, but we're feeling it in our public health costs and many people getting sick. The playbook that they are using is basically developed by the tobacco industry already more than 50 years ago. And I will just go through very quickly a few of the tactics. First one is withholding damaging knowledge. When international company research reveals damaging information about their products, that information is often not shared with the public or regulators or is actively hidden. Second, undermining independent science and conducting research that favors corporate interests. Funding academics to promote industry-friendly findings, cherry-picking and amplifying friendly findings in public discourse or to influence legislative processes. For example, in the farm-to-fork strategy, that tactic was actively used by CropLife and Copa-Cogeca to basically destroy proposals on pesticide reduction with the help of the Wageningen University in the Netherlands. Third, pointing to other causes for harms, deflecting blame for a product or industry by citing other alternative causes for the negative impacts. Fourth, intimidating and targeting independent scientists. It was mentioned already here today. Just very recently, the head of an Italian research institute, the Ramazzini Institute, was fired. He was, maybe, was it a coincidence, heading the renowned international's new study on glyphosate, now currently being examined by ECHA and EFSA. And I will stop very soon. Using front groups, funding fake grassroots groups, in practice known as astroturfing, recruiting participants to lend credibility and to promote industry-friendly narratives. And then finally, emphasizing economical costs over all others, manipulating data to distort cost-benefit analysis, overestimating costs of regulations and underestimate benefits. And then there's some case studies, for example, on PFAS. A few years back, several European governments calculated that the annual costs for European healthcare systems of PFAS is around between 50 and 80 billion euros a year. This is only PFAS. And yet the European policymakers, politicians are only talking about costs. And this is incredible. And I think there might be two recommendations. One is, I think science, civil society, which by the way are also heavily under attack from European politicians. The health NGOs lost their funding last year through a decision of Commissioner Varelli. But the cost aspects to society, I think we should emphasize much, much more. And the fact that we're all paying those bills collectively. And then secondly, one of the recommendations from this playbook is, like we have seen for the tobacco industry, the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, Article 5.3, stating that policymakers dealing with public health policies cannot meet tobacco lobbyists. Why not have the same kind of policies for the fossil fuel industry and the chemical industry? It might sound wild and radical, but I think given the very, very urgent health crisis and environmental crisis that we're all facing, I think it's not so radical. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I know these things are very close to our hearts. And that's why it's very difficult to stick to 2 or 3 minutes. I understand that I sympathize with it myself, but we hope that nobody is standing outside and comes in. So we run until we're kicked out. So, but the last one I would like to invite to give us his reflections is Dr. David G. He has been a long time fighter for environmental issues, worked with the European Environment Agency for many years, if not decades, and has instigated and orchestrated the 2 volumes, wonderful volumes of late lessons from early warnings that should really be a duty lecture for everybody doing policies. But David.
Thank you very much. So I speak English rather quickly, and I've only got 4 minutes. I've just stolen 2 to make 8 points, which are on all the big issues raised by all parties here. First one, the precautionary principle, we should have called it the foresight principle because that's the better translation from German. So from now on, please say the foresight principle, which sounds very positive and interesting, whereas precaution sounds pretty boring. And so the foresight principle was used 7 times in the 35 case studies in the 2 volumes of late lessons from early warnings. 2 quick examples. Antibiotics in animal food, which the British MRC scientists said in 1969 should not be allowed when the antibiotics are also used for humans. That was ignored by very powerful agribusiness industries until 1984, when a bunch of small farmers and consumers in Sweden said, why are we feeding antibiotics to cows and pigs? It will affect human resistance to antibiotics. The evidence was not great, but it was sufficient enough to make Sweden ban it then. A few years later, Sweden joins EU. EU says, you have to remove that ban because all of us in Europe use antibiotics in animal feed and there's no problem. Sweden produced a big fat report, took it around all the member states, and in 1999, on the stroke of midnight, when they were supposed to ban their regulation, they persuaded the EU Sweden was right and the EU had been wrong. And the EU then proceeded to ban antibiotics in animal feed. Pfizer takes the Commission to the European Court of Justice. Read that judgment. It's PP principle, foresight principle, all over. The other good example was neonicotinoids. You know what? Neonics and bees. France took the big step, not on majority science, I'm directing my comments to the Commission here, but on credible minority scientists. Sometimes one scientist has the better view of reality scientifically than 25 other people who have got the wrong assumptions and paradigms in their heads. They've written books about it. They find it very hard to give up their chosen view that X is harmless. So if the Commission waits for majority views all the time, you will make big mistakes for certain. Next point, the PP always stimulates innovation, and it's blindingly obvious as to why. If I'm using this technology and for 25 years and it's become sort of harmful and somebody says you can't use it anymore, I have to stimulate myself with innovation to produce another way of dealing with that human need. So the PP brings forward by decades innovation. Now, industry didn't believe us when we said that at the European Environment Agency, so they persuaded DG Research to do a 3-year big project to look at, can we have the innovation principle stuffed into the Commission, into the regulations, so as to counterbalance the precautionary principle. Massive workshops with industry and with everybody else. That 3-year project said, the foresight principle is fine, it does not inhibit innovation, it stimulates it, and there are 3 bits of the existing treaty that allows the Commission and others to promote innovation. So that attempt by industry failed. Next point. anticipatory research. For volume 2, we commissioned a guy who looked at the EU research budgets for the last 30 years, divided it into 2 columns, promoting technology, investigating possible side effects of that new technology. 1% of 30 years of billions and billions and billions of public money went on anticipatory research. Rubbish. The only country to have a debate on that was Holland over nanotech. The budget was going through to finance nanotech. Somebody said, wait a minute, what about anticipatory research? Nanofibers are a bit like asbestos fibers. We might have a problem here. And if you do have a problem, of course, industry suffers because their product gets hit on the head. So it's in industry's interest to finance a decent amount. How much is a decent amount? Dutch Parliament, they said 15%. We are going to devote 15% of this new budget to promote nanotechnology on anticipatory research, looking at the possible risks that might occur and anticipating them so that they don't happen and industry doesn't get hit on the head. No other country has done that. So DG Research should now say to itself, for the next framework program, how much are we going to spend on anticipatory research? And it should go from 1%, in my humble view, to 10%, and it will pay dividends. Next point, effectiveness evaluation. My first report for the agency, 1996, environmental taxes. Effectiveness evaluation. The Commission told us you can't do that. We do policy, you do data. We said, sorry, in our reg, there's a word, effectiveness evaluation, and we're going to do it. We should have a lot more on effectiveness evaluation of policies, whether they be regulatory or taxes. And still, most regulators in the world do not do that because they spend 10 years producing something. They don't really want to go back 10 years later to find out that it didn't work very well. So there should be a lot more effectiveness evaluation. Next one, future generations. In the Brundtland Report, 1987, next year, 40th anniversary. At the end of the Brundtland Report, it was called Our Common Future, the first global report on the environment. The last section says, unless we have an educated, knowledgeable public, citizens, aware of what the environmental problems are, then nothing that we have said in 1987 will happen. That generally has not happened. We're now promoting knowledge for planetary citizenship as a mass global educational awareness raising program to put the end of that 1987 report. Another couple of very quick points. Environment and media. Gulbenkian Foundation Portugal funded us to do a really good conference 20 years ago on environment and media. That is so needed again now because of the different circumstances of the media that you all know and love. Finally, divergent evaluations of the same evidence has been one of my bugbears or interests for 20 years. Workshop at the agency 20 years ago, we didn't publish anything. So I did it again in 2020 with the help of American colleagues. And it produced an article which is called it's called Conducting Evaluations of Evidence That Are Transparent, Timely, and Can Lead to Health Protective Actions by Producing Actionable Evidence. Not beyond all reasonable doubt, not scientific proof, but actionable evidence that will prevent damage to people or planets. And in there, we took 4 case studies, BPA. There were 8 different competing scientific evaluations of the same evidence. We took glyphosate, there were 4 completely different evaluations of the same evidence. And we took ELF, which is power line stuff, and one other, I forget which it was. And we just showed that all the stuff that Eric was talking about was deeply in play. Intransparent assumptions about models, about paradigms, about choice of evidence and so on. So do read that article because it shows you how 4 very controversial issues were looked at quite differently by honest scientists. They weren't bent scientists or criminal scientists. They were just different scientists. And once policymakers realize how it is that ordinary people, scientists, not bent, not paid by Monsanto, can genuinely lead to different evaluations of the same evidence, understand why that's happening, understand the implications of taking which group's view, then we will make a lot of progress. There was one last point, can I just make it? Which was, hang on, I've lost it in here, really jumping evaluations. Wait a minute, it'll come in a second. So there's a chapter in volume 2, Late Lessons, Early Warnings. It's just called Costs of Inaction. You must read it as a policymaker because they are huge, those costs of inactions. And you don't often hear that in the cost benefit issue. Plus one more thing, pros and cons are the words to use, not just costs and benefits, because they include qualitative things like trust in science, trust in government. Thank you.
He is difficult to control too. So thank you very much. It's been a fabulous last word. I'm not going to do much about it now and close the meeting. Thank you very much for coming and sharing the time and space with us here. I think it's been wonderful to have you all here.